Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Pramod Bhasin, very often known as the father of India's business process outsourcing or BPO industry. He's the founder of Genpact, and the story is legion by now, how 25 years ago, Mr. Bhasin persuaded GE to come to India and help set up the BPO industry. He has since been chairman of NASSCOM, currently the chairman of ICRIA and of Clicks, as also a part funder of ThePrint, and that's full disclosure for all of you, dear viewers. But I'm also speaking to Mr. Bhasin today because of the current situation in India, the ongoing pandemic. Horrific figures coming out every day. India has just recorded the highest single-day spike globally, a terrible record to have. In fact, one of our colleagues at ThePrint has just passed away, not from COVID, but we mourn her, but she will be smiling as we go on with our journalism. So Mr. Bhasin, welcome to ThePrint.
Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you very much for having me. These are the worst of times, I think, for so many of us.
Absolutely. And my first question to you is, you've been a serial entrepreneur. You've sort of made your money, your wealth. You haven't spirited away in Swiss bank accounts, but you've kept it here in India. But tell me, what do you make of the COVID crisis and its impact on the economy today?
This crisis, the second wave, I think, is part of a quadruple whammy we're going through, right? Starting with demonetization on one side, the GST debacle or whatever you wish to call it, although it was necessary and I'm glad it happened.
Yeah.
The financial crisis after that, and then the first round of COVID and this second one. So I think it's devastated us. We had a bad growth rate before we went into it for the last 3 years. That growth rate plummeted, collapsed, call it what you will, 18, 20% lower growth. It's probably the worst of any large economy in the world. And this current phase, I fear, is even worse, not because of longevity, but because it's hitting you when you're already badly wounded as an economy.
Okay. And
this last phase that's happening nowadays, which is hitting every company so devastatingly with such high numbers. Earlier, we could all work, Jyoti, work from home, do all kinds of things in the earlier waves last year in 2020.
Right.
Now it's hitting everyone at home. 10-15% of Clicks Capital employees are down. Many number of people at ICRIA are impacted.
Down with COVID. Down with COVID.
Down with the infection right now, right? So it's hard to get any momentum, get any work done, get stuff done. Earlier we were saying you can work so much productively at home and so on and so forth. I think those tables have suddenly got turned in the last 20 days completely. You can't work very effectively when half your family is ill or your neighbors are ill or your staff is ill or somebody else is ill. And I think the impact of that will be much more devastating. We had looked forward to a fast recovery because every indicator in the market suggested that the recovery would be very quick. And I'm also an advisor to Kedara, which is a private equity firm. So we deal with a lot of portfolio companies. And we could see that the recovery, which will be a V-shape, by the way, there is no other shape that's likely. There's a lot of talk about, we'll have a V-shaped recovery. That's not a source of joy. That is a dead cat bounce. It is only going to be a V-shaped recovery. And it was coming back, but I fear it's receiving another body blow that India's sort of bankrupt spirit and infrastructure can barely cope with.
Those are very, very strong words, bankrupt spirit. I mean, what do you attribute this to? Are you talking about the fact that we didn't look deep enough, didn't look far enough, didn't look closely enough at this COVID virus that was going to be so devastating? Which of those?
We just, I think, pronounced victory too early. I think we're all guilty of that. I am guilty of that, without question. Without question. I thought, my God, we've conquered it. There were heroic efforts by healthcare workers across the country, particularly in Delhi. I was very proud of how Delhi came together and across the country, everybody was saw it. But this new wave was coming. We didn't see it, and now we're into this absolutely horrendous fight between center and state and one party versus the other in the midst of a war, which is the worst war this country has faced. More people are going to die of COVID than of any other battle or war or anything else we may have done. I don't know. I hope we don't reach the same stage as partition times when so many people had died across the country. And yet we are fighting. It's horrible to see that happen when you would have thought everybody should be getting together to heal the wounds. We're having elections. You have the Prime Minister on one hand saying, come and vote in large numbers. You have the Health Minister saying, socially distance. They're completely incompatible. And I fear that we've lost the plot completely. And now the whole world is standing and watching India go through the fate that we feared would happen when the COVID first hit. And it didn't happen. And we were very lucky. Now we're not.
So two questions, Mr. Bhasin. The first is, you're saying that the Prime Minister is going ahead with his poll rallies. In fact, both him and Home Minister, Mr. Amit Shah, are going to be in Bengal because there are a few phases left. Mamata Banerjee, the Chief Minister of Bengal, has truncated her rallies, but she is going to still be leading them. As a citizen, as an entrepreneur, as a business person, what does this show to you? What does it mean to you?
This is ultimate negligence to hold elections at this time. Under what circumstances or what thought process is it okay to hold elections when people are dying on the streets openly? When hospitals aren't being fulfilled, when oxygen isn't there in hospitals and 22 patients die overnight because of a leak in hospitals, and we're having elections, we're having a Kumbh Mela, we're going to have other festivals. I don't understand either the philosophy or the intent behind this. And it somehow suggests that we don't care. And we really don't care. And life is incredibly cheap in India. And it's okay to go ahead and try and fight for elections and not fight as hard to make sure that every hospital gets the oxygen they deserve. And we put up the infrastructure that we need.
Yeah, but surely the Prime Minister cannot be getting oxygen organized in hospitals across the country. I mean, I hear what you're saying. In Delhi, hospitals are running out. You talked about the Nashik hospital, but surely the Prime Minister, who we elected, you and me and all of us, he came back with a huge mandate in 2019. Yes. Surely he cannot be doing this single-handedly.
No, he can't be. And that's the mystery, right, for all of us. He can't be, and this is not what he needs to do. He's been a very, very strong leader, but I'm afraid at this point in time, that strength isn't coming through. What you need, and this will spike devastatingly in all the areas where the elections are being held. I think we're seeing that. We're going to see that. And therefore, what you don't need is to propagate it, to create that many more problems. I mean, hear the plea of doctors who are saying, before you go out and party, think about what you're doing to our system. You're going to then come home and put all the pressure back on us, and we're going to have to deal with it. So you stop doing, and then you focus. I mean, I think the Prime Minister has shown in the past that when he focuses on a issue and he gets his teams together, they actually find solutions and can get things done. I mean, if you look at roads, some of the finance bill, even GST, they rammed it through when they wanted to ram it through. That's what we need. We need a war office on COVID.
You're accusing the Prime Minister of not focusing.
On this, absolutely. We don't see it. We don't see it. I mean, maybe they are. I don't see it. I don't know who's deciding all these things. I don't know where the war office is. I wish there was a war office around COVID. Perhaps the Prime Minister is. I don't know. I'm not privy to that. Yeah. But it's not obvious to us who is making the decisions based on what input. There's been a plea from everyone to open up vaccinations much earlier. It hasn't happened. I wish it had. Because I think I'm not a doctor, but I've heard every other doctor I've spoken to, every minister I've spoken to, people have said, I wish there was more. So I don't know. The Prime Minister must have focused, but where are the decisions being made? How are they being made? Is a mystery to all of us. And right now you would think our entire time has to be spent in a war room thinking about how to fight the pandemic and bipartisan, without saying that Punjab, you're terrible, without saying Delhi, you're misbehaving, Maharashtra, you're doing this badly, etc. This is surely the time to put away all that nonsense.
Mr. Bhasin, we're talking about the lockdown. Delhi is in the middle of a 1 week long curfew. We don't call it a lockdown, but that's because essential services and other services are still, are being held, which is a good thing, I would say, in some ways. But do you think that the lockdown is the answer to this? What is it going to do to the industry? Your colleague, Bajaj of Bajaj Auto, has said that lockdowns are terrible and they will be devastating to the economy.
Yes. Jyoti, I wish I was far more of an expert on these matters. I'm not. Lockdowns have proved to work in very few countries. Most countries have said they haven't, but yet the countries where they have worked are doing very well. If you look at New Zealand and a whole bunch of countries, which are very small countries, frankly, yeah. And you can hardly consider them to be effective in the same way that India is. Certainly, there's some evidence to suggest that earlier lockdowns also worked, that by spacing these lockdowns out, it actually worked. I don't agree with Rajiv completely that lockdowns will devastate industry. I think there are times when you have to lock down, and that's fine. But I do think this phase is different, not just because of lockdown, but it is the speed of infection and it is the number of people impacted. We all know that all numbers on COVID infection are vastly understated, right? I got news from some people saying we can't even get a test done in UP, in Noida. We can't find anybody to do a test. So we don't even know what those numbers are like. And therefore, what it's doing is it incapacitating such a massive number of workforce this time that I don't know if a lockdown matters or doesn't matter. People are just getting devastated in offices. I'll tell you, in our office, imagine 15% of your office being infected and down and unable to work, focus, concentrate, any of those things. Mm-hmm. And that is going to really hit us. We have to aim to stop that. How do you stop that? Get vaccinations, get the infrastructure ready, add capabilities, add oxygen, get a lot more vaccines sorted out. One of the greatest mysteries, Jyoti, in today's world is very simply, the entire world, including the US, India, everybody else, has known we will need about 14 billion vaccines. 7 billion is the population, we need double that, 14 billion, maybe 10 billion, because some of them can be done with one jab. Nobody went in and put in the capacity. We've had 15 months to do this as collectively in the world. It is a bankrupt. What is wrong with this world? What is wrong with government?
What about associations, industry associations like CII and FICCI and ASSOCHAM? Why aren't they speaking up? Your angst today is I'm hearing it, but why aren't more people in industry, in chambers of industry speaking up?
We certainly hear, certainly when I talk to people, everybody's talking about this. Perhaps many of them don't want to talk about it openly.
Why?
I think people are scared. People worry about this.
They're scared of what? I don't understand.
Retribution, scared of of people getting upset with them for being critical, lots of things. People want to, bury all this under the carpet, I think, in many cases. And I'm not sure why we should. Right? Retribution
from where?
I don't know, Jyoti. I haven't heard it, by the way. I'm a founder of Ashoka also, by the way. For instance,
Ashoka University, right?
Yes. And while a lot of people thought there was a lot of pressure from government, actually the answer to that is there was no pressure at all from that we were aware of. So I don't want to just say it for the sake of it, but industry generally, because industry here has been on its knees now for some time, except for a few areas of industry, like technology, like startups, like edge tech. The vast bulk of industry has been going through a very, very rough time with enormous amount of, for instance, pressure on taxes. There are things like lawsuits that are going on, tax collection efforts that are going on, that make it hard to do business in India. We still are a very tough place to do business. I wish we weren't, because there is a plus side to all of this that I do want to talk about, which is that I think startups are flourishing, investment will come through, private equity is flourishing in this country, doing very well. There are many new areas of industry which will work very well. Roads are being instituted, last mile telecom is going in. And so amazingly, Jyoti, in the midst of this, you will find that India is producing an astonishing number of great companies, unicorns. I don't want to call them unicorns because that's it seems an over-abused word, but many companies and a lot of wealth is being created in this environment. And that, I think, will carry India forward. But on the other side, it's very hard to do business here, Jyoti, in India, and it remains unfortunate. And I wish and the answers as to why it is hard are quite obvious. It is not rocket science. And I wish we would all spend a lot more time focused on getting that sorted out.
So, you earlier talked about this lack of bipartisan spirit. The BJP and the Congress party accusing each other.
Yes.
Maharashtra is bad, Punjab is terrible, Delhi is even worse. Now, what does this show, this sort of squabbling between ourselves, what does this do to India's image abroad?
There was a long time over the course of last year when India was doing very well, because somehow we seem to have managed it. Mm-hmm. I remember lots of dialogues with people I know there saying, we don't know how, but our fatality rates are very low. It could be demographics, could be earlier vaccination, could be all kinds of things, could be the fact that our population in the rural areas spread out. But at this time, the fact that we have elections happening while people are dying on the streets outside hospitals is not an image anybody can stomach. It's an open question of why would any country determinedly violate their own principles? How is that possible? And therefore, people ask a lot of questions overseas and say, is this government only intent? And I'm not talking about just one party. I'm talking about all parties participating in this election, right? It's not like just the BJP party. Every party has said, now many of them have said we have no choice. If the elections aren't called off, we have to participate. But it asks some very basic questions about our discipline, about our sense of the value of the life of our people, and about how to handle the worst pandemic in our history. We have to remember this is the worst thing that we have seen in a century, not just in the last decade.
Right. So how does this compare with China? Genpact, when you were with Genpact, you opened an office in China, and we've seen that China is bouncing back. Its economy is bouncing back better than any other country in the world.
Yes.
Of course, the virus, the COVID-19 virus has come from China, and we're in the middle of this pandemic, but China is bouncing back for the reasons of discipline that you talked about earlier. How do you think, when you look at it sort of geostrategically or geoeconomically, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Jyoti, China has an enviable reputation for execution and industrial progress and development, which is the most remarkable in the history of the industrial world. They execute better than anybody else. If you go across Africa and you see the roads that they've put in and built, they are par excellence.
You've seen them?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Go to Zambia, go to Rwanda. I've heard about the roads in Sri Lanka. They are fantastic. You would be, any country would be proud of having those roads. You go to China, and during the years when I was working in China, and even a few years ago when I visited them, the pace of development is extraordinary because their entire focus is on execution. They don't spend that much time on discussions, arguments, different opinions, all the things that we Indians love. You won't see that happening there. Mm. And their focus on getting things done is enormous. One of the reasons I did in the early days certainly thought that some parts of this government were wonderful was because they were focused on getting things done. I think they still are, by the way. They still are focused on getting things done, but it's getting completely lost in the noise and the rhetoric on politics and caste and religion, etc. There are things there, but China does that incredibly well. So when they go out with a mission, I don't think there is a single country in the world that can do it as well as China now. The Burj had to be made with Chinese people who put the glass in place in Dubai because nobody else in the world could do it. The Apple iPhone had to be done with glass made in China because nobody else could do it. So I think we underestimate the technological advancement and the changes of the education system that the Chinese have put through in their system. I'm not defending what they've done against India. It is intolerable and unacceptable. But equally, let us remember that the strides they have made in technology, artificial intelligence, and education system are extraordinary. Shanghai only compares with New York and is perhaps ahead. In artificial intelligence and healthcare, I think China is probably 10 years ahead of any other country in the world, including the US. And I think these are facts that I think we must remember.
Why do we underestimate them? I mean, you're right about saying that, India and China have been at each other's throats in Ladakh for most of last year.
Yes.
And you are calling them out on that. But why do you think we consistently underestimate the Chinese?
We because we've had this war going on with them on the skirmish, and the skirmish is going on for so long. And I as an Indian feel violated as to some of the excursions they have made into areas which are none of their business. And we don't understand why China is being so aggressive, by the way, with every part of the world. It's not just us, right?
Sure.
And in the midst of that phenomenal growth, they are also into this entire discussion around being, back to the power that they once were across the world. I think ultimately that will harm them enormously. But in the meantime, I think it will be very good if we spend time also looking at the things they have done well. Mm-hmm. Their education system is completely revamped, Jyoti. Their universities are amongst the best in the world. The professors they're bringing back into those universities are the best in the world. They've had all of them working together, and their bureaucracy, by the way, and their mayors work with a single-minded purpose towards the benefit of China. And they do not work at loggerheads, one ministry versus the other, someone else fighting for turf, etc. You don't just see that. I'll tell you, time and time again, I would go to China and go to the mayor of Dalian and say, look, we need this. We would love to see more English education in the curriculum. And 3 months later, we'd go back and there would be more English education in the curriculum of colleges and schools. They execute and they are single-minded and they are proud of what they've done. We cannot forgive them what they do against us. But there is no need not to ignore everything else. In fact, I hope we can learn from them because they've done some astonishing things.
I think perhaps we have this sort of idea of India being a unique civilization, with a 5,000-year-old history. So everything that we do perhaps is something that we do uniquely and differently. But my question to you is,
there's nothing unique or different about artificial intelligence, technology, capability, ed tech, etc. There are many common themes that we all need to learn. Engineering, or our entire IT industry where I come from, is not unique to India in itself. It's unique to India because we're English speaking, right? This interview is in English. In China, it wouldn't be. But other than that, this is a global world. We share too much with each other. We're dependent. We're far too dependent on each other across many continents to think that we can be unique to ourselves at this point in time.
So, you spoke about the Apple iPhone and how the glass continues to be made in China, despite the fact that the US and China are again at each other's throats. I mean, they have their own war going on, their economic war, of course. But when the Apple iPhone factory, the Winstron factory outside Bangalore, was in the middle of this, this chaos some months ago, what do you think that did to India's reputation? I mean, I remember many years ago when the Maruti Suzuki factory, when one person died in a strike, the Japanese, for years and years afterwards, were very suspect about India's laws.
Yes. Yeah.
What do you think this will do?
Jyoti, it's hard to describe how inexplicable it is to see many parts of our government and our bureaucracy working at seeming loggerheads with the private sector. We work in an atmosphere of distrust. The bureaucracy doesn't trust the private sector. particularly. The private sector doesn't trust the bureaucracy, particularly. Both for very good reasons, by the way. I'm not forgiving the private sector. We are not holier than thou. We have committed 1,000 sins. If we say India is corrupt, the corruptors are also the private sector and have thrived off that, apart from some notable exceptions, of course. And the IT industry, I think, is one notable exception. So I don't blame each side. But you cannot do much in an environment of deep distrust. The courts don't trust the average citizen or the private sector either. If you look at our court system, a lot of the judgments are against the private sector, are not against, sorry, are couched in phrases which suggest enormous distrust.
Right.
The default answer, Jyoti, when you're doing business in the West is that you trust each other. The default answer in India is you don't trust each other. And that brings in all the friction that you would expect between two parties trying to do business and move in the same direction, because at every step you're checking each other all the time. And that phenomena plays out, not just at the Apple factory, but in 1,000 different ways. I was just sitting at my desk this morning and saying, it would be interesting to do a comparison on how long, for instance, an average company spends on bureaucratic rigmarole in India versus anywhere else in the world. And I'll tell you personally, sitting on boards, I probably spend, at an average board meeting in India, we probably spend half our time on administrative, bureaucratic stuff described by the Companies Act or something, voice recording, state your name, state that you can, I'll go through the quirks of these. They are fascinating quirks as to who invents this stuff. I don't understand. And yet, I would tell you in other, having lived and worked in the US for many years, I'll tell you in many other companies, we would spend a fraction of the time. That would be done in 5 minutes, and you would get on with the real business of a board meeting. Give you an example. Look at the FCRA rules for NGOs that have come up right now. Everybody has to rush to Parliament Street to open one bank account through SBI. Can you imagine? And all the trustees have to sign, produce Aadhaar cards, produce PAN card. Can you imagine the enormous waste of time that has gone through? Every NGO has had to go through it. Go there, have people rushing around, trying to figure it out. This is what the brains of this country are involved in. They're sitting there trying to figure out how to put in a goddamn paperwork so that you can put in one more SBI account for one more. And that's the rules that have been framed. Why? Because you don't trust anyone any other way.
But surely this has been going on, when you started the BPO industry 25 or so years ago.
Yes.
Animal spirits should have taken over. I mean, Dr. Manmohan Singh's famous phrase, but poor guy is in hospital right now with COVID.
Yes.
But, we remember what he did to, and subsequent governments like the BJP as well as Congress-led governments by him. So surely we should have learned better.
We don't. That's the astonishing part. That's the point I was talking about. It is inexplicable that we all seem to be working at odds. And when you sit across the table with somebody and say, this is the wrong thing to do, and they sit back and fold their hands and say, yeah, but this is the rules and this is the way it's going to be. And it doesn't seem to matter. So I think that's one point. But the other element I would add is it's getting worse, Jyoti. This sort of administrative, bureaucratic nonsense, I really think is getting worse. We're getting new rules, new regulations being made out, new forms to fill out, new checks and balances on everything. The level of distrust seems to be growing. It's not coming down. And if anything would happen, I wish we could launch an entire movement jointly with the government. This is something I think the Prime Minister would jump on. I hope he would.
But the Prime Minister has been saying, even when he came to power in 2014, is that he was going to sweep all the dead wood with a big fat broom. And he has done some of it, I'm sure.
He's done some of it, but we need to do so much more. And I'm sure he's got better things to do than worry about this. But we should launch jointly with the government a massive effort to completely clean up all the nonsensical rules, policies, processes that inhibit every one of us. For a small company, Jyoti, For me, as a BPO head, I'm working with GE. I have an army of people. They take care of it. I don't need to. For a small company, it's nightmarish. The angel tax comes in. The FCRA rules come in. The Companies Act rule come in. Then you sign 100 documents. Then you sign 20 other documents to be a board member. Then you have to have a digital signature for everything. You need an Aadhaar card for anything. You can't go to the bathroom without carrying your Aadhaar card with you anymore, I don't think. And I think you need, you're getting to a point of complete distrust. The amount of information that people need, who is keeping this mountain of information? I would love to know. It's going into some bowel somewhere, and nobody really understands the damage this causes to the efficiency of a company or a private enterprise or the government itself.
It's not like this in China. They coined the word Mandarin. I mean, they are the original bureaucrats, aren't they?
Yeah. Jyoti, the bureaucrats there are motivated and incentivized to work towards GDP growth, very clearly. They're accountable. Lack of accountability of the bureaucracy in India is one of India's largest lacunas. And and I'm not talking about the top level bureaucrats where we have some of the smartest people in the world, but those top level bureaucrats also cannot do so much. At the mid level, I've tried this in the skills business. State governments owe us so much money in every area. We cannot get the mid-level to move, come hell or high water. And we can know every minister, chief minister, etc. All of them are impotent. They cannot move a file if some mid-level guy says, we have a problem in this file, annotates it, that's it. So that power to hold up anything in demand for whatever they wish to call it, so it has to be eradicated at some level, Jyoti.
Surely the political leadership is the only one that can do that. I mean, we can't all of us throw up our hands and say what is to be done when it's up to the political leaders to fix that, isn't it?
Not really, Jyoti. I think I've despaired as to why the senior bureaucrats don't take this on and try and fix it. Okay. Why don't they get together? Why doesn't the judiciary get together to try and clear its legal backlog? Why doesn't the income tax authority, which by the way has happened, the income tax authority is certainly, I would say, for many companies, by moving in these rules of anonymous tax audits, etc., will make a huge difference, by the way. It'll make a huge difference. And they're trying. But it's all too slow, Jyoti. It's all too slow. Our level of impatience for change, or I would say our level of patience for change, is way beyond what it should be. We should be angry, we should be upset, and should be saying, we need change faster, folks. We need to make it happen much faster because a country with our level of poverty cannot afford anything else.
Well, I suppose people like you have to speak up much more, but we really don't hear these voices. But my last question to you, Mr. Bhasin, is how this state of the economy that you've described, how COVID will then impact on this, this situation, and what it does.
We are blessed in many ways. There are many industries in India which will do well. There are infrastructure pieces that are going into place which will do well. Mm-hmm. But there are two blindingly difficult things, obvious and difficult things that I don't know how we're going to overcome. The government has run out of money. State government, central government, GST collection, etc.
You think so?
Yes, they have to print money. We have to go into deficit financing. We have to increase our deficit and not worry about it. I hope they'll do that.
If that is going to have an effect, that's going to have like a snowballing effect, isn't it? Where if you print more money, there will be inflation in the economy, prices will go up, the cost of everything will zoom.
It will, Jyoti, but I think it's a risk we have to take at this point in time because reviving the economy is more important than that. And maybe we'll have to find room to control inflation.
You think we need to revive the economy, Mr. Bhasin?
100%. 100%. Not for us. We big guys sitting in our living rooms talking like this, we're blessed, we're privileged beyond belief. I wake up every morning and say, my God, how lucky we are. We are privileged, unreasonably privileged, beyond belief. It's for the unorganized people. The migrant laborers, the people in the village, where, by the way, because of the lack of data, we actually don't have a clue, really, as to what's happening. We don't have enough data collection. We don't know what happens with the 7 million people who join the workforce every year. We don't know where they go, how much they earn, what are their savings. We don't have data. So for those people, I can only hope that reaching out, spurring the economy, getting funds to them through Manrega, other places, can really help them do much better, because they are desperately short, desperately hungry, and now very ill in many parts of the country. I don't know what else will solve it. And I think you've got to say to hell with the fiscal deficit management at this point in time, and really go out and print money. And accelerate privatization and sale of assets if you can. Selling banks is a much larger proposition, but you have assets, land. Let every ministry, for instance, railways, armed forces, defense, sell their own land to finance themselves.
Yeah.
Ease that burden. All of them have enough assets. But again, what you'll find, Jyoti, it's a bit like, why didn't we order enough vaccines? And I bet embedded in all of this is some myriad complexity of bureaucracy, perhaps, which said, how can we pay anybody when we don't know when the order will be delivered? How can we do it on spec? How can we do this? How can we do that? And similarly, when you're trying to sell government assets, as you've seen with procurement of defense, the complications that our entire machinery can go into to paralyze the system is amazing. If we don't unlock that stuff, I don't think we can really move a country forward as fast as we need to, given the government does control 50% of GDP in our country, pretty much.
So create an opportunity out of this unprecedented crisis.
We have to. And we can, Jyoti, because actually India can create enormous wealth just by serving the needs that we have, basic needs. Doesn't have to be tech. It could be agriculture, waste, water, healthcare, pharmaceuticals. You can go almost anywhere, packaging, logistics. We're seeing, when I work with some private equity firms like Kedara, I work with Kedara, as I said earlier, we're seeing astonishingly wonderfully run companies in very core industry where business people are doing it the right way, they're doing really well. And I think there's going to be a massive area of job creation through startups and new growth industry, which will change the corporate landscape of India, Jyoti. You hear all the usual names now. My hope, and I think it's happening around us, is over the next 10 years, you're going to hear 1,000 different names, which you've never heard of till now, who are going to bloom.
Well, may 100 flowers bloom, or 100 or 1,000 companies bloom. Mr. Bhasin, thank you so much for your time. Full disclosure, again, you're a part funder of ThePrint, but completely self-made in your own right. Thank you so much for your time, for speaking to the Print.
Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you so much.